Hello and good afternoon, everybody, or good evening if you're joining us from India. I am Arjun and I'm your host for today's Pivot in Progress session. Um, so, today's session is on a topic that we have been getting a lot of queries from many people who are part of the Pivot community, as well as outside of it. We know that this is a very much a growing trend right now, which is how do we, rather than just solely depending on one job for our income, for our earnings, how do we build out multiple sources of income and do it in a way which does not burn us out? That is an important question which is gaining more and more traction in the market today because of many reasons that we are going to discuss throughout this session. And I'm very excited to have today's speaker with us. She's already there backstage. Her name is Maggie Blackburn, and she has done some tremendous work over the last few years in helping many professionals kickstart their own portfolio career or multiple income source career journeys. So without further ado, I'll bring her up to the stage here. All right. Maggie, welcome again. How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Well,
Excited to be
thanks so
here.
much for making time for this. I really appreciate that. Um, just before we get started on the topic, maybe what we can do, Maggie, is just quickly introduce ourselves. And I can go first. So, for those who don't know me, my name is Arjun, and I'm the founder of Pivot. What we do at Pivot is help mid career professionals make different types of career transitions. Typically, they're changing some core elements. So they could be changing their level in the organization, their industry, their country, and other similar types of transitions. I have spent my career over the last 15 years both in New York, US, as well as in Bombay, India. And we have built a community which spans across 20 plus countries at Pivot. So we'll talk more about what Pivot is and what we do through the course of this conversation. But I'll turn it over to Maggie. And Maggie, if you could just share a little bit about your background and what you do today for our audience, that would be great.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I have about a decade of experience working in corporate and tech and product marketing, specifically at companies like Slack and Asana. But about a year and a half ago, I left and I pivoted from product marketing into events, which led me down a path of a portfolio career where now today I do fractional marketing for startups. I write a newsletter. I sometimes do event planning and retreats for companies and community events of my own, and just
Mhm.
bring people together who want to maybe move away from traditional work and build their own freedom and stability with a portfolio career.
Gotcha. No, thanks for sharing that. And very exciting journey. I think you've had multiple pivots yourself, it seems like, and you've been able to dabble into multiple other income sources outside of your core niche. So, really looking forward to dive into that and see how we can unpack a lot of insights for the audience here today. I do want to make a quick caveat for people who are joining us. We did have another speaker planned to join for this event, Carolyn Maniape, and unfortunately, she met with a personal emergency and would not be able to join us. But we'll see if we can do an event with her in the future. And again, Maggie, I know you have a lot of good experience here, so we'll spend good time kind of just unpacking everything that you've experienced in building portfolio careers. So let's start with the first topic, which is the why behind this whole trend. So I think it's always good to start with why, because before we jump into what are the different income sources and how do you actually build those in a sustainable manner, there are many people who are even evaluating if it's the right thing to do for themselves. Um, and so before they make their decision, I think it's important to point out maybe some of the key factors that should be taken into account if you are contemplating building multiple income sources. So why do you think people are getting into more and more of this trend of building portfolio careers, having multiple income sources?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing a few things in the market, right? So if you are in tech, but even outside of tech, there are layoffs that are happening. You're watching maybe coworkers getting laid off if you haven't been laid off yourself, but that is driving some sense of fear and sense of, okay, if I'm going to get laid off anyways by a company, and maybe I was thinking about building something on the side for so many years, whatever it might be, now could be a time where I do this anyways, because if again I'm going to lose my job and I don't have control over that, what do I have control over? So I think that is one reason why people are gravitating to portfolio careers. I think the other thing is people are redefining success and what that means to them. So if you're a millennial and you grew up climbing the corporate ladder thinking that, okay, I'm going to have the house and the family and a really good job, and that's going to make me happy and successful, and you got there and it wasn't quite the case, then you're questioning things and you're wondering, okay, I followed the path that was supposed to be laid out for me,
Mhm.
but now I have to redefine success. And instead of listening to everything around me and what everyone else thinks, thinking about what I want truly and figuring out
Mhm.
how to get that. And that could be another reason why people want to pursue multiple things and not just climb the corporate ladder.
Very interesting. I think what you said about redefining success really hits home because I think a lot of people, especially during the COVID timeframe, went through this sort of existential crisis and started questioning decisions in a more fundamental level. And I think that led to a lot of the people choosing multiple career paths. I think the other aspect that I wanted to get your take on is how it's become more easy and doable to have multiple income sources. Do you agree with that? Is that one of the contributing factors in making this a bigger trend in the recent past?
Yeah, I think it's both accessibility, like, with AI and being able to spin up a product or an app, that sort of thing, or even use it as a thought partner. The accessibility is there. And I
Mhm.
think it's also become more socially acceptable as well, because we're seeing more people shift to fractional work, freelance, or leaving their corporate job, or even just building on the side and creating content and sharing what they're doing. I think it's become yeah, more accessible now in both ways of like people the tools and also just society
Mhm.
saying, okay, this is a path that you should be going down.
Yeah. The second point that you just mentioned with regard to the social acceptance and I guess awareness as well, right? Because more and more people are talking about it, and there are folks like you and Carolyn who are also putting it up front on their profiles so that other people can see that this is possible and that you've done it. So it is definitely possible. So I think the awareness is also increasing. But with regard to the um, social acceptance, actually, that's a point that I want to maybe just split hairs here a little bit. I think there are companies who are a bit resistant to having their employees have multiple careers, right? For various reasons, which is sometimes understandable, I guess, because if you're working full time in a role, and you have other priorities that are taking your time and attention away from the main role, then it could be problematic. And I think historically, companies have been a bit more rigid around this, that if you take up any additional, major income source, you need to inform us or something like that. It's usually in the company policy documents or in the employment contracts. But like you said, it's becoming a little more acceptable, perhaps. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, why is that happening? How are companies who are full-time employers especially, how are they becoming more and more um, agreeable to this kind of a change?
Yeah, I think there definitely will still be companies that have a stricter policy and say, okay, you cannot do this and this will violate the policy. If there are other things, outside of that where you don't violate the policy, then, those are some things to explore, but it also it's very dependent on your manager and leadership and the relationship there. So there will be, I think, some people or companies that maybe it's harder to build on the side. But I do think we're seeing more companies accept the fact that employees are building a personal brand, and if they're talking about something either related in the industry or even kind of outside, but it still can connect back to the company, that actually helps, because with AI we're seeing a lot of consumers just not trust companies and what they say. So if you can get your employees to build a personal brand and enjoy their work and talk about it in that way, then I think it does help.
Hmm.
It does help the companies, and it's usually I think smaller companies as well, like startups and that sort of thing, that may be more acceptable to employees doing that. But I do think it just depends on your manager and the policies and things like that.
Gotcha. Um, so the next thing that we typically get asked, and I would say this is likely the most common question that we get around multiple income sources, is how do I sort of leverage my skills, my experience to build on top of that rather than do something completely different and unique where I have to start from scratch and it'll take a lot of time and effort to build that. And that's not something I'm looking to do because that defeats the purpose of having like passive income or easy low hanging fruit kind of income opportunities. So how do you see this landscape of various opportunities for people who are targeting a portfolio career? What are some of the most common ones that you feel have kind of established their place in the market, and what are perhaps some of the new emerging ones which you feel will be more popular in the future?
Yeah, so I think if you're first starting out and you maybe don't know exactly what to do next, but you do want to leverage some of the skills and things like that, this is sort of where I started, where I just proved to myself that, okay, I can build some income on the side using my marketing skill set. So, again, having a product marketing background in tech, I essentially thought, maybe I want to work with different types of clients, small businesses in New York, and started to consult on the side and freelance with them. So I did like social media marketing and found clients through just my network and through, even talking to small business owners that I was already working with. And so from there, kind of started there where I wasn't doing anything outside of my company policy. It was a totally different industry, but I was using my marketing skill set. And for me, it was more of a treating it as an experiment to say, do I like working with these other clients? I worked with a Pilates studio, a hair salon, totally different than what I was doing in tech.
Wow.
But it did help
Mm-hmm.
me learn, okay, this is how you build a proposal, and this is how, you get paid. Something that I didn't
Mm-hmm.
really know if I could do, but that helped me validate that first thing. And I think we're going to see still service based businesses because that's the fastest way to get started. But I think we're also going to start to see more products as well that pop up because now it's easier than ever to spin up an app or website, a product, and get
Mm-hmm.
people using it. And so I think we'll see more of that in the future with portfolio careers.
Got it. Um, so let's maybe do another like deep dive on this topic because I know there are a lot of people who are thinking about it. And a lot of folks who come to us asking like, okay, I'm thinking about a side income or portfolio career. Generally, they are thinking about, I think, four or five different types of income sources. So one is obviously your main role, whatever that is. The second is more along the lines of what you shared, which is freelancing or having some sort of an advisory or consulting business in that area. Then I think it is a lot of times, like you were mentioning earlier, building a personal brand or content creation where you either utilize that to get more collaborators and clients, or perhaps you're just going to do brand deals, which is again an additional income source. And then there's investing for people who do have some small amount saved. They start getting into not just retail investing, but sometimes angel investing as well. We're seeing more and more people get into that. So I think these are some of perhaps the common ones. And I know that you're also in your career, you're helping, you like coaching other folks. So coaching
Mhm.
is area where people are getting a lot of additional income. Um, I think these are the most common ones. Correct me if I'm wrong, but how
Yeah,
do you think
there's
people should think about sort of structuring their decision amongst these common opportunities?
Yeah, yeah. And just to add a few more in there, those are common. I think teaching as well, which could be,
Mhm.
one to many, either creating workshops or courses or that sort of thing, teaching,
Mhm.
as well as, a community similar to Pivot, where maybe there is multiple people, that are involved, and it's more of a community model where maybe people pay per month or have a membership fee. But
Hmm.
yeah, in terms of like where to start or yeah, what to focus on, I think there's a few different factors. It really depends on one, your financial situation. I think a lot of times where if you want to do this on the side of your job, you technically have what I call like anchor income from your full time job to help support you, pay your bills, that sort of thing. And so, you know, you know, picking one to start is sort of thinking about what would be exciting and fun for you, because if you're going to be building alongside your job, you want it to be fulfilling and fun, and not something that you feel like you have to do. So I always like to use that as a north star. And it also just depends on how fast you want to get things spun up, because things like content and building a personal brand is going to take time. You technically, if you start an account today, I would, you can't make money, I would say, for the first few months. You want to build trust and authority with people. Versus if you were to maybe take your skills from your full-time job, maybe you had a project where you built something really around AI, who knows, whatever it is, and you taught
Hmm.
them to an audience, taught them to people who wanted to learn from you, then technically you can monetize that faster. So I think it also depends on speed, interest, and that sort of thing.
Gotcha. Yeah, teaching is an interesting one. And the other thing, anything that you want to talk about in terms of investing, is that something that you've seen or done yourself, where you're seeing more and more people kind of getting into angel investing? Because, in some of the key tech hubs in the world, like whether it's US, Western Europe, India, China, you're seeing a lot of great new companies coming up, especially in the AI space now. And earlier it was harder to invest in the private companies, but today we are seeing more and more folks going into investing even at a pre-IPO level. So they're investing, in an angel round, or just kind of dabbling into investing in different forms and fashion, like crypto and all those things. Is there anything that you have seen happening on that side?
Yeah, I do. I mean, personally, I don't angel invest, but I do know that that is happening more and more. And a lot of it, I think, with angel investing, at least what I see is it sounded like the barrier to entry was higher, but a lot of times, sometimes these checks are $1,000, $2,000, and it's about getting in, building your network, figuring out how to find these different companies and learn more about them, which is
Mhm.
another plug-in for building a personal brand and kind of sharing like what you are looking for and what you're looking to get into, because I do think that helps attract the right sort of opportunities. A lot of times people
Mhm.
don't know how to help you if you don't tell them exactly this is what I'm looking for right now.
Got it. Great. I know we have a few questions already coming up in the chat. So thanks, folks who have joined today, and really appreciate you spending time, your precious time with us. We'll be taking up your questions shortly for Maggie and myself to address them. But just before we do that, I wanted to get Maggie's thoughts on something which is going to be the most palpable and sort of vivid part of this conversation, which is real life examples. um, so Maggie, I mean, you have your own brilliant example here, and I'd love for you to maybe share your own story in a in a deep dive kind of a manner, like what made you think about portfolio careers, how did you go about specifically building these three different income streams that you have today, and what are the sort of the ups and downs that you experienced as well. And if you have helped others and there are certain other examples you would like to share, we'd love to hear about those as well. And then we can jump into some of the questions that we are getting, and the other questions we have gotten prior to even starting this.
Yeah. So I think with a portfolio career, you can see people online and you can see, oh, they have 5 income streams or 8 income streams. Doesn't necessarily mean maybe all of those are happening at once. And I also think it's
Mhm.
really important to build them one at a time, and invest in one at a time. Once it gets relatively stable, then you move on and you add something else to the piece of the pie, if you will. And so For me, it was when I left, it was freelancing in the event space, and particularly figuring out how I could just enter through and get my foot in the door in events because I hadn't done that in my corporate career. And the first
Hmm.
client was me reaching out to someone on LinkedIn, and who I reached out to probably a year and a half before that, and had a opportunity open up pretty closely to when I was leaving my job. And so that was a 150-person retreat that I helped produce in San Diego for a company. And that was sort of my first foot in the door of freelancing. And from there, I also built my network in events, again, telling people, hey, this is what I'm looking for, until
Yeah.
something else opens up the door. So I found my first few clients that way. And then I think month 3 or so, month 3 or 4, I
Hmm.
wanted a little bit more stability. With freelancing, it can be hourly, it could be a bit more unstable. And so I think with a
Hmm.
portfolio career, it is nice to have some sort of anchor income. And so I basically found a contract where I was doing fractional product marketing for a
Hmm.
set amount per month. So I knew at least every month for the next 6 months, this was the minimum I was going to be paid.
Got it.
I
Got
yeah,
it.
I can continue more, but I don't know if you had a question or
Yeah,
just.
I did have I wanted to double tap on the first point that you made about the events thing. Now that's very interesting, very exciting because you didn't have a ton of experience doing that before you got this first project. And I don't know if it was that easy, but it sounded like pretty easy. Just like, you reached out to a client, you pitched it to them, and they gave you this project for a 150-person retreat in San Diego. That, I mean, that would be a dream for many, many people to be able to get something like that. So can you maybe go behind the scenes a little bit? Like, how did somebody who did not have a lot of experience get into organizing a 150-person, not like a 10-person or 50 people, but like 150? That's marvelous.
Yeah,
How do you
yeah,
do
yeah. Yeah, I think so. What I've learned working for myself is it is all about building relationships, and you never know where that relationship is going to take you, what it's, what path it's going to take you, but building relationships that way. And so I guess for me, it started with a curiosity of, I don't think I want to do product marketing forever. What do I do next? And I love bringing people together. I love traveling, and so that's how I came up with this retreat idea. And so then I went to
Mm,
LinkedIn and searched retreats or event marketing, and I found
mhm,
people who I talked to. Again, it does sound like it came up out of nowhere after I left my job, but it was probably a year and a half or 2 years where I sent
mm,
that LinkedIn DM and asked to learn more about this person's journey because she had left her marketing career to start a retreats business. And it sounded like something that I wanted to do. And
mhm,
so then over the years, 2 years, I met up with her once in person in New York, followed up with her a few times to continue the relationship. And that's how that part came to be. In addition to, you have to put yourself out there, I think, in order to get something back a lot of times. So when I left my job, the scary message that says, I left my job, these are the things that I'm looking for, help me, basically asking my existing network to help me. And also sharing the personal story around why I wanted to get into this, I think helped with the relatability of, okay,
mhm,
she hasn't done this before, but she really wants to do it. She wants to figure it out. Having all these
mhm.
people in my corner felt good. So that is just one example of how I found my first clients through LinkedIn and just putting myself out there.
Very interesting. It's so intimidating or overwhelming for so many people to start something in a new field, because at Pivot we're in the business of helping people make very unique transitions in their career. And I'll tell you, like, based on my experience working with now, like, personally, I've worked with over 1,500 people. One of the biggest trends that we have identified is many people get stuck at the first stage, which is their mindset around thinking about how they're going to tackle something completely new, let's say in a new industry or in a new domain. I think the way that you're explaining it, I think that's really helpful. You kind of like, it takes time. It's not going to be immediate. but you have to kind of build relationships, you have to study the market, you have to understand, like, who are the current players and how do you kind of position yourself. So just one more follow up on that, and then I'll definitely move on from this because it's just so interesting to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, the
Did you,
mindset piece too, just to
yeah,
one more there, like, I
yeah,
think the
yeah.
mindset piece took me a long time to develop because I didn't go out the gate saying, okay, I'm going to send all these LinkedIn DMs and everything's going to be fine. It took me a long time because probably 2 years before I left my job, that there was a moment where I didn't know what I wanted to do next. I felt really stuck. I felt like I couldn't move forward, and
Hmm.
I couldn't pivot from product marketing because that's all my experience. How could I do anything else when my resume said this? And so
Hmm.
I worked with a coach to work on my mindset. And I mean, happy to share more details around like some of those things that I did, but that's how slowly over time I felt more confident and capable to put myself out there more. It wasn't out of the gate, just guns blazing.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think that is a perfect, I think, use case for coaching. When you're starting something new and you don't have the mindset yet, makes a lot of sense. But the other thing that I wanted to ask is, did you do this all by yourself in terms of the actual project implementation? Because a lot of times we see when people are providing a service to other companies, and it's not just like a skill like a product marketing, but it's an entire like event and an entire operational execution that needs to happen with multiple stakeholders. It can be very exhausting to do everything yourself, especially when you have other things happening on the side as well. So did you like collaborate with people? Did you use certain tools that helped you be more efficient at this? How did you go about sort of navigating in terms of the project execution?
Yeah, so for this example, for the 150-person retreat, I had someone else who was there with me, and she had done something similar before. So I was lucky to be able to partner with her. And,
Mhm.
there was a lot of things that I was owning, but it was, a lot of meetings, spreadsheets, like calling vendors, all of the things that go involved into an event like this. But then there was another instance from just sharing on LinkedIn saying, okay, I'm going to leave my job. Here are the opportunities I'm looking for, where it was more of a research consulting project that I did for this company, which is a really cool company, or I don't even know if it's a company, more organization. It's called Camp Chateau, which is a women's retreat center in a chateau in France. And I did some research with them, and that was one of my first projects as well, where I didn't have anyone with me. It was just me figuring out, okay, what timeline makes sense? How do I create the proposal for them? What
Mhm.
pricing makes sense? All of those steps that you need to take to be able to sell and then deliver on what you say you're going to do.
Interesting. And were there any specific tools that helped you? Obviously, tools can vary depending on what you're doing, for sure. But
Mhm.
given that there's so many AI tools and so many other tools out there that help people, was there anything like that?
So back then, I mean, it was not that far away. It was like a year and a half ago,
Mhm.
or like maybe a little bit less. And Claude Cowork was not out, and so that is kind of what I use all the time now, as well as some other AI tools, Whisperflow. A lot of these tools, maybe they were out, but they weren't popular. I don't think Claude Cowork was out. So I
Right.
wasn't really using it to the biggest ability. But now, if I were to do it, it would be different because I do have automations set up with Claude where it helps me with my content. It helps me with not creating the content, but just like repurposing content,
Hmm.
responding to emails, things like that. That I think it would be easier and different than when I did it before.
Okay. Okay. Very cool. Um, you also are coaching other women, if I'm not mistaken, on how to build portfolio careers, and you coach them. Is that something you want to talk about in a little more detail? Like, especially not necessarily like the portfolio aspect, because that's something we're already discussing, but more about like how did you build, let's say, a coaching practice for yourself?
Yeah, so I think for me, I kind of grappled at starting with coaching. I think a lot of, and this is common, I think, for a lot of people, it's like, who am I to be a consultant? Who am I to be a coach? Sort of questioning myself around this. And I think the way that I approached it with a lot of the things that I shared is more of an experiment to say, okay, well, maybe I can get one coaching client, see how it goes. I don't have to just call myself a coach. It doesn't have to be my entire identity, but let me just see how it is to work with other women who are going through something similar that I've done. And
Hmm.
and then from there, it was like a step-by-step process where I got one client and then, I reevaluated and said, okay, actually, I kind of want to work with this type of client, got that type of
Hmm.
client, you know, tweaked my messaging, that sort of thing. And then eventually enrolled in a coaching certification, which I think is smart because I didn't want to invest, $7,000 plus on a certification if I
Hmm.
wasn't sure that I wanted to do it. So I think for me, it was baby steps, but there's definitely some imposter syndrome that I had to get over to be able to talk about it and say,
Right.
okay, I'm going to do this. So that's sort of how it came to be for me.
Okay. Any other examples, Maggie, of like people you've coached or stories you've heard around you where you just think it's worth kind of calling it out, how those folks navigated building multiple income sources?
Yeah. So a few examples. I would say the women that I coach typically, one is either in corporate and wants to figure out how to build the portfolio career, maybe even leave her corporate job as well, has been working for 10 years, maybe around that time frame. And so one example was a previous client who knew she didn't want to stay in her corporate job, but she wasn't sure what she wanted to do next. And there was a lot of fear around money. And she also had family responsibilities. She had a kid. And so there was some hesitation, which is normal of, okay, I want to do something else, but I also need a job. And so I worked with her to figure out what that career experiment was on the side, where it would be something that she could be more creative and, at least start and get over this fear of starting. Because I do think that, like you mentioned, is a challenge for folks to even just put themselves out there to start. So she negotiated part time at her work while also finding a client in the same field that she was doing, left her full time job, and now is doing some consulting work in what she was doing before in marketing, but also now has more time to build out her creative business where she's helping folks do like creative services like graphic design and party planning and that sort of
Hmm.
thing. And so getting her from that point A to point B. But then there's other clients that I also have worked with who are trying to figure out how to set up their portfolio career in a sustainable way. So
Okay.
what are the offers? How do I position myself? How do I put myself out there on LinkedIn? All of those things too.
Interesting. All right. And I think there are a couple of more things that I want to discuss, but let's take up this question that's come up here from Jaffer. And the question is, would love to understand some modern practices that founders are doing to create more impact via their personal brand. Um, I'm sure this is something that you have helped with, Maggie. So you want to share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not sure what type of founders or, that sort of thing, because I can answer
Yeah,
for like
actually,
tech
Jaffer
founders.
has shared some additional context. He did talk about the fact that he's an expert in brand management and
Oh, I see.
marketing, and he has a great client base and wants to grow his business further. And yeah, so I think in that context, he's trying to understand how to leverage personal brand to get more business, I guess.
Yeah, so I can, yeah, talk a little bit more about that. I think there's I guess different sides to the personal brand, right? What's the goal? For most of us, it is to maybe find more clients or find brand deals or whatever that is, find opportunities, attract opportunities to ourselves. And so when you think about your content, the way that I think about it is mixing in sort of these like top of funnel kind of content. What are your predictions? What are the things that, maybe hot takes or things that you think specifically about in the industry that your client would relate to. So having some content like that, having more middle of funnel content, which essentially would be tutorials, how to, mistakes, lessons learned, things like that you can help again showcase your journey and your expertise in a specific area. And then more bottom of funnel content where maybe that's a client testimonial that you post, once a week, or case study, or just sharing how you walked a client through a similar challenge. Having a mix of the type of content can be helpful. And I think founders that do this well are the ones who can weave in their personality and their storytelling into this, where it's not just something that AI wrote and something generic, but there are specifics, and it's almost, you feel like the founder and you can trust them and relate to them. That's the biggest thing, is how do you build that through storytelling and just being yourself online. And so I think that's what I've seen work really well with founders and even employees at companies that are posting and building a personal
Mhm.
brand.
Got it. Um, I'll just take a quick minute to add my thoughts here because so I was a LinkedIn top voice, the blue badge, not the brown one, for about 4 years. And that actually gave me a lot of visibility in the right ecosystems on LinkedIn. Um, and I would say this, like, obviously things have changed drastically on LinkedIn, where it was when I first started writing in 2022, and where it is today. But everything, Maggie, firstly, that you said, I would echo that. I also think, like, it's really important for you to be experimentative early on when you are trying to build your brand, because you don't know what's going to exactly work. While you might be aware of the topics and the expertise that you bring to the table, um, but exactly the writing style and the format, the timing, the ICP or the customer persona that you're targeting, I think these are certain things that you probably want to not be too rigid about when you're first starting. And just do it in a structured way where you're kind of like testing different formats, hooks, topics, ICPs, and see for each of them what kind of traction you get. And then over a period of time, I think there would be certain patterns that start emerging, and those are the ones that you probably then want to double down on. But the experimentation and the sort of creative brainstorming is something that I would suggest that everybody continues to do, even if, like, for example, you figured out like 2 or 3 types of posts that are generally working well, similar to the ones that Maggie were referring to. I think even in addition to that, you should always be experimenting, because the trends change really fast. People's like content consumption habits change fast. What are the hot topics? I think those keep evolving quite a bit. So I think it's important to stay nimble and just kind of keep with the trends and with the algorithm changes that may also be happening on the platform. So yeah, that's just one more additional point of view that I wanted to add here. But this is a really interesting and fast growing side income for many professionals. I've never built a side income off it personally, because the goal was to kind of create more of a personal brand, to make sure that people who were navigating changes understood that pivot existed and they could leverage it. But I know I have a ton of friends and other collaborators on LinkedIn who utilize it for a side income. And I'm sure, like, there are other platforms like Instagram, TikTok, etc., which help you do the same. So yeah, I think very yeah, this is something that's going to become more and more popular, and there are many aspects to it. So definitely reach out to Maggie, or people who have that experience building brands on this, to get their feedback. The um, other thing that I want to discuss before taking up the next question is the burning out part. Maggie, we have not really tapped into that so far, and so far it's been more about what are the different opportunities that you want to consider. How do you evaluate whether you're going to be good at them? How do you start? How do you stay efficient and all of that? But a lot of times, when people are thinking about starting something in addition to their day job, or let's say they're venturing into something that is, you know, for a first time they're doing freelancing, and alongside that they're doing multiple other things. So how do you manage your time and your bandwidth? That is a big question for many people, because it's not just about income maximization, it's also about your bandwidth efficiency management. And a lot of people I speak with who are trying to do this, they actually want to work less, not more, compared to their full-time job, right? So how do you do that? How do you make sure they're not burning out? Or is it even possible, like in today's times, if you're building multiple incomes, is it even possible to expect to work less? Let's say like less than 10 hours a day or something.
Yeah. Well, I don't always definitely don't work like 10 hours a day, I think, but I think yeah, one I think I've learned just from burning out myself around what not to do and what I want to do going forward as well. So, I think a few things that I think about is one, different seasons that you're in your business, in your life, and where you want to focus more energy and kind of like work harder, and where you want to take off the gas a little bit and, have a bit more fun, maybe some breaks. And so for me, a lot of times my business is busier in the spring, it's busier in the fall. And so
Mhm.
the way that I think about it is in the summer, it's more of maybe I'm building, doing things internally, like creating content, stuff like that, keeping the lights on almost. But in the fall, I have maybe more clients or I'm launching a new program. And I think about that as a contained sort of time. I think what happens is with burnout, if there is no end date, if it's, you're doing something that feels misaligned to you, that's when you start to burn out. If you're at a company where you just don't believe either in
Right.
the mission or like that your work is making that much impact, you do it for a prolonged period of time, there is more, so you're more susceptible to burnout. But I think thinking about it in seasons helps. And then in terms of priorities and prioritization and like time blocking, that sort of thing, and how to manage your time, it is really becoming really good at prioritizing. What are the in that season? What is the one to two things maybe that I want to focus on? And I kind of mentioned this before, but when you're building something new, building out a new income stream, it's focusing on that income stream, not necessarily trying to do all of them at once, because ideally the other ones that you've built out are more stable. You have some sort of system. I think same thing with
Hmm.
content for me, like LinkedIn, I started posting there once a week, then I ramped it up a little bit more, then up more, and then now I'm posting on Instagram because I have more of a rhythm and idea of, and even like muscle of posting on that platform. I think it's the same thing approaching different income streams too. So I would say, yeah, different seasons and that sort of thing. So, but Arjun, I don't know if you have thoughts too on that, because I'm constantly talking to other people around how they're optimizing their time using AI, like working smarter, not harder. And yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. To be honest, initially when I first started Pivot, I just sort of expected to spend a lot of time, because I think you're indirectly or directly made to feel like, as a founder, that you need to really work excessive hours. And I think sometimes that still happens on and off. But you're right. I think you have to think about ways very intentionally to be more efficient, because if you don't, it just kind of like, creeps up on you, and it really sucks out a lot of your time and bandwidth. So I think the way that it has worked for me in the recent past, even though we've been growing fairly rapidly, getting a lot of clients, is being very mindful about three things. Um, Number one is being very clear on what your goals are. Like, what are you really trying to achieve by doing various things? Because if you're not clear on your goals, you end up kind of doing a lot and not being sure whether it's giving you the ROI that you need or not. And it sucks out a lot of time, because, like, for example, let's say you're doing marketing for a company. Marketing is endless. You can do it in so many different ways, right? You can do product marketing, social media, SEO, performance, influencer, affiliate. You can do everything. You have the full, smorgasbord in front of you. But you have to be very, very clear about your internal bandwidth, and you have to be clear about what your goal is, how much traction are you really trying to aim for, and based on that you make much more calculated decisions which help you optimize, I think, your time and effort. So I think that's the first thing, is being intentional about your goals. Second is, I think, delegation, if especially is possible, either to a tool like an AI tool or to a human being. If you're working in a company, or sometimes I've seen people, like I have a relative who works in US, and he has been a freelance designer for a long time, and initially it was just him doing everything for his clients, but recently he told me he's been doing it for over 10 years, so he didn't want to join a company full time, but he started delegating to other people in his network who work at a lower sort of fee or income. So he charges, let's say, X, and he gives like 30% or 40% of that to other collaborators. And so it's sort of like a mini agency sort of a thing that he's running. But those collaborators are not full-time employees. So, he has the flexibility to kind of collaborate with whoever he wants and anytime he wants. So I think delegation is not just for full-time roles. It is for freelance roles as well. It is for consulting and coaching as well. And like you mentioned, there are tools like Claude Cowork, and I think certain industry specific tools as well that can be really helpful in terms of delegation. And the final thought there, I would say, is similar to what you said, but just maybe in a different angle, which is when you talked about time containment. I think that's a really powerful formula, and I'm glad that you brought that up. But I think time containment also in terms of when you sort of accelerate and when you sort of just maintain the status quo, or you kind of like decelerate a little bit and pause and take time to evaluate how things are going, and remove the excess, remove the waste that's been built up and crept up over a period of time, and being intentional about removing that like wasteful activity which is not leading to any ROI. Yeah, I think doing it even like, let's say, 3 or 4 times in the year can be really helpful, right? Otherwise you get into sort of this cruise control and you're just blindly doing something because that's legacy for you. um, but reevaluating and questioning that really helps. Yeah, I think those
Yeah.
were probably the three things. Yeah.
Yeah.
But thanks, Maggie. I think this has been really helpful. We have one more. I would say it's sort of like more of a thought than a question, but I think we'll still take it up. It's a thought from Pratibha, and I know Pratibha. Thanks for joining, Pratibha. Good to see you here today. So, one thought this discussion sparked for Pratibha: building a portfolio career isn't just an external shift; it's an internal one too. Before stepping into freelancing or entrepreneurship, it may be worth doing some inner work around money, self worth, and service. Our beliefs about what we are worth and what we are comfortable charging for the value we create can influence our success as much as our skills. Very interesting, and I think valid point. You had mentioned something regarding this when you were starting to coach others and starting these new things in your career. Do you want to just maybe, I know there's not a particular question in there, but do you want to maybe talk about this a little more, Maggie, where you navigated a new situation in a way where you were also charging for your time and your effort in a fair manner for both you and your clients?
Yeah, I think the mindset piece is foundational for a lot of things, where if you don't believe in yourself and then you're trying to kind of sell this idea to someone else, then the way it comes across can also be perceived, in the energy that you share, the thing that you're trying to do with someone. And so there's just each example. Every time I'm doing something new for the first time is an example, I feel like. So the first time I got a client outside of my full-time role, it was like, what do I what do I charge for this? I'm YouTubing social media contractor rates and trying to figure out what to charge. And other times when I've never necessarily done the coaching or the events, it's also a piece where I have to tell myself that just because I haven't done this exact thing doesn't mean that my past experience does not relate to what I'm doing. And
Hmm.
there are other things where I am telling myself around, like, if I don't try, if I don't start, then I'm never going to have the opportunity to succeed. that has helped me push through these like mindset blocks around imposter syndrome and saying that, oh, maybe I should charge less and that sort of thing. And I do think when you're first starting out, it's totally fine to charge more of a foundational rate. You don't need to charge, the highest premium. But to get some clients, I think that's totally fine. But I do think it is worth charging for your time and your past experience as well. That can maybe even make you even better and a bit more differentiated than someone else who doesn't have that experience that you do.
Well said. Um, no, I think that is a foundational piece, as you mentioned, and I'm glad that we covered it in a more in-depth manner. So, Pratibha, I appreciate you sharing that thought. Um, I think, Maggie, we have covered a lot of ground. We've talked about, the mindset piece. We've talked about how exactly to evaluate the right opportunities for yourself, how to get started, how to be sustainable without burning yourself out. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you feel should be shared with the audience around building multiple income sources?
I think, one question I get is who is a portfolio career for and who is it not for?
Hmm.
And I think a lot of times the people who want to build a portfolio career are usually someone who may have multiple interests and passions and kind of want to explore those in different ways. They don't maybe necessarily call themselves an entrepreneur, but there is some sort of mindset of like this curiosity, someone who is curious about this, and it doesn't have to happen in the very beginning, but someone who is willing to slowly start to take a bit of, a risk of putting themselves out there, sharing their ideas and that sort of thing, I think is really helpful for someone who's first starting out, because that is how you get these opportunities, is by asking for help, like I mentioned. So
Hmm.
that sort of thing. And then who a portfolio career might not be for is someone who actually really just wants to do that one thing and only focus on, maybe it is their job or that sort of thing where they want to do that and do that well. I think that would be harder for someone to split their time between a few different things.
Got it. And what about people who are thinking about it primarily from a monetary perspective? Like they're mostly motivated to have more income. Do you think that usually ends up being the case for most people? Or do you think there's a fairly big risk associated with having higher income in portfolio careers?
Yeah, I think there's a mix. I guess I can talk about personally and then other people also I've talked to. I think it's important to have a number in mind, in my opinion, because if you don't have a number in mind of, again, maybe how much your lifestyle costs, how much would be comfortable for you, then you could run the risk of just trying to grow and grow and grow without that number and burn yourself out, or just feel like misaligned again because you're doing this for someone else and not necessarily for you. So I think having a number in mind to hit. And then once you hit that number, everything else is
Mhm.
just extra. Um, and sorry, I think I lost my train of thought, but the question was around uh, kind of
Basically,
yeah,
yeah, if you think that people who are monetarily driven
monetary.
primarily, would they be able to succeed in most cases by building portfolio careers or not?
Yeah, I do think so. I think if you have,
Mhm.
again, yeah, the number and you continue to work at it, you can succeed. I think,
Mhm.
as well as if you, for example, have your skill set that you do on work and maybe you want to monetize that, that's one way to do it even faster. I think I could have
Mhm.
increased the number I made my first year if I just took my like marketing skill set and just did marketing consulting and maybe created content on the side. But for
Right.
me, I knew what was important to me as well, which was helping other women build portfolio careers, doing things that were
Mhm.
fun and lit me up as well. So, I think there's like a balance between all of it too.
Like you said, right? Like define your own definition of success, and
Yeah.
that could be more than just money, for sure,
Mhm.
for sure. But I know there are a lot of people who are a bit risk averse, but they also want to try this out because it just seems so attractive, especially from the outside. It seems quite attractive to have all the flexibility and autonomy, be your own boss, and also have potentially higher income. So I think a lot of people are evaluating it from that perspective, that hey, I want to work hard, but I don't want to work harder than my current role, and I don't want to be financially disadvantaged compared to where I am today. So I think just in that regard, I'm trying to think about the success rate for something like this, because for example, if you think about being a founder and starting a startup, the success rate is really low. It's
Mm-hmm.
less than 10% globally, right? So people who get into it know that they are going to have a very disproportionate kind of risk reward ratio, but these are the risk takers, these are the people who are okay with that kind of risk taking. I don't really see that in a lot of people who are transitioning to a portfolio career. I think they are fairly like risk averse still. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the reason I was asking about that question.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's more of a lifestyle choice as well, where when you become a
Yeah.
founder, like you're mentioning, you're okay, I'm going to grind versus I want to create a portfolio career. I think starting it alongside your job, just again, validating the income stream, building a personal brand, these are all things you can do to sort of de-risk yourself. So when you do, or if you do decide, there are also, people who have portfolio careers that have full-time jobs because they do
Mhm.
teaching and content and things on the side.
Yeah.
But if you can start that alongside your job, then I think that'll help de-risk. Some people can do that, some people can't. Some people are all or nothing sort of people. So it really depends on your personality, financial situation, all of those things. But ideally, you have validation before you start, so you can start with some learnings.
Yeah. Great. I think we have a final question from Avantika. Avantika, the answer is yes. This session is recorded. You can view it later. But that brings us to a close for today's discussion. Maggie, thank you so much for being so generous with your time, your insights, examples, and sharing your own journey. I learned a lot of new things, and I'm sure our audience did as well. Um, I would recommend anybody who has joined us today for this session, or if you're watching it later, feel free to reach out to Maggie on LinkedIn. Maggie, I hope it's okay if people reach out to you on LinkedIn
Yeah,
to get tips, or maybe perhaps even work with you on building their own portfolio careers. Yeah,
yeah. Please reach out. Yes.
perfect. Great. Thank you again, everybody. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. And special thanks to Maggie once again. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Arjun. Thanks, Pivot. It was great seeing. Well, I can't really see everyone, but seeing the chat. So thank
Yes.
you.
All right. Bye, everybody.